So hi and welcome to this podcast with me, Geeta Joshi. You're listening to the Curator's Salon, and today I'm talking to Barbara Segal. Welcome, Barbara.
Hi, Geeta. Nice to be talking with you.
Thanks so much for making time. So I thought we would, let's start with how you came into your discipline, because you're a stone carver. Did you call yourself stone carver or stone artist?
I call myself a stone carver and a contemporary artist. So I applied to L'Ecole des Beaux Art when I was 19 years old, and they told me I had to join a workshop. And upon walking into the stone workshop, the kids in the school there were so nice and wonderful to be with that I just said, okay, I'll do this. But I think it's an inherited discipline because my great-grandfather was a wood carver. So I think it's something you either love or you hate.
And then, so you were at Pratt before that, weren't you, at the Pratt Institute, you said, and that took you to the Ecole des Beaux Art. And then how much time did you spend in France after that?
I was in France for 2 years studying with the professor. His name was Colomarini. And then I went back to Italy, where I had gone with my school originally, and moved to Pietra Santa and then Carrarra, Italy.
So I know of Carrarra because that's where some of the best marble comes from. But where's Pietra Santa?
Pietra Santa is about 20 kilometers south of Carrarra. The Alpinian range of marble mountains goes from Pietra Santa to Carrarra and then back into the Alpinians north. So I don't know, maybe 5 kilometers or so, 10 kilometers.
So it's just that area of the world has some of the best marble then?
Well, the white Carrara marble is really quite amazing because of its compactness and its color, and it's a beautiful marble to carve, and it holds all the points and all the edges, and it's consistent, and it's really fun. And it's also mostly pure calcium carbonate, so you can almost breathe it.
So when you were in Pietra Santa, what were you doing there? Were you at a workshop or an atelier?
Well, I went and worked at a workshop. We called them laboratorios. And at first I was working at Sem's, which is a very famous marble studio who used to do the work and still does the work of Henry Moore and now Damien Hirst and many other well-known artists. But then after that, this was in 74, and then I started working in Fonderia Tomasi. So I was in Pietra Santa altogether like a year and a half. And then I moved to Carrara. And everybody knows who Sem is. He was quite an interesting character to work with. Pietra Santa in the early 70s was an amazing place to be because all the artists from all over the world would come there and hang out together in one location for evenings, whereas now it's become more of a tourist destination. And the city used to be filled with workshops and artisans working every other store. It was quite amazing. So I also, after working in the atelier carving stone, I then went for a year and worked in Fonderia Tomasi in Pietra Santa, casting bronze as well as learning how to make molds.
And then that was the work that you brought back, or the skill set then you brought back to the US, is that right?
That's correct. When I came back to the States, I got a job in Roman Bronze Works bringing rubber molds, and I believe I was the first woman to work there. I know that. And also teaching them how to make rubber molds. And that was the first foundry in New York.
So what were they using for their mold making before, if not rubber?
They were using a gelatin mix, which was reusing what they had used before, mixed with a black goo and gelatin, and they would just keep reusing this material and pouring it in over the casting, the model, over and over and over again. And it doesn't last. It breaks apart, whereas the rubber molds last.
So what were you molding?
Oh, we were doing 20-foot sculptures of George Washington, and there was a scandal in the 70s about these fake Remingtons that were being produced, and I actually was told to make those. So my claim to fame is making a bunch of fake Remingtons and waxes, finishing waxes, working for very, very famous artists and cleaning up their waxes for the lost wax process.
So after that, you went back to Carrara. What were you doing there?
When I was in Carrarra, that was like 75, 76, I worked in a studio called SGF, Studio Scultura in Toronto, above Carrara, with a young group of artisans and many internet sculptors from all over the world, and we carved stone. And that particular laboratory also would make enlarged pieces for artists, for anyone, but also some well-known people as well. It was an amazing experience, and I really learned there and watched there how to carve, how to enlarge, and all about stoneworking.
All of this sounds like you were sort of working, producing other people's designs and things like that. So at what point did you sort of evolve to, making work of your own design?
Well, actually, when I was in Pietra Santa and in Carrarra, I was doing my own work that whole time. I was not working for other people. But when I came back to New York and worked in the foundry and was trained in the skill, I was doing other people's work. So, and then I would sometimes freelance and work for other artists and do their work. But the time I was in Europe, I was a student, but I was doing my own work.
So when did you then start producing work for galleries? Because now you're with, about 6 or 7 galleries, aren't you?
I think it's 4 or 5. Okay. Yes, that's true. Maybe soon will be more. In 1985, my husband and I made the decision I should just work solely on my own work and see what happened. And very soon after, within the next couple of months, I got into a gallery in New York City. So I started to sell.
That's fantastic. And back then, sort of looking at some of your earlier work, you were making apparel, weren't you? There were clothes and things I've seen, like shirts and jackets.
Yes, I was, yes.
What was the inspiration for that?
Well, basically a girl coming from suburban New York, going to Pratt, which at the time was in a terrible neighborhood, and then moving to Europe. When I walked into the cathedrals of Europe and saw the amazing architecture, the stacked stones, it blew me away. I was in awe over this, not only just the architecture, but also the work of the very well-known artists that we know. And I think the only connection that I had back in suburban America was my mother's clothing. I mean, she had Pucci shirts and she wore the pedal pushers and she had beautiful gowns and gems in the gowns. And so the only comparison between Renaissance Italy and suburban America, the cathedral floors, was my mother's clothing. So I started to make my mother's clothing in stone.
Fantastic. And how was that received? Because was there anybody else doing anything like that?
At the time, no, because it was all inlaid and laminated and multicolored and constructed like the churches of Europe. And when I first got into the gallery, I showed them different work. And right after I got into the gallery, I decided to start making this apparel, and they started selling right away. That's what started selling.
I didn't realize that... because I wanted to ask you about this, but I think you've answered it. You're saying that the work, where you've got different colors and things, they're inlays on the apparel sculptures. That's incredible.
Well, in the beginning, I kind of, I just knew I could make a pinstripe shirt. That was my first idea. And I kept saying to myself, well, why should I make a pinstripe shirt? And I kept saying, nah, what's the significance? What does it mean? So I didn't make it. And then 6 months later, I went through the same thought process and I said no. And then one day I had time to do it and I just did it. And I sold it like in 2 weeks. And I went, okay, I think an artist does get influenced by the market. But then I played for the next 5 years, different ways of using the stone, all always autobiographical. It always had to do with my life. But as I moved ahead, it was doing paint by number, that's a childhood influence. Vasarely optical illusion, having been at the Vasarely Museum. Feeling that, my father died when I was 10 and that men were more powerful than women, and doing 2 Venuses on the naked, on the inlaid, on the outside panels of a man's tuxedo jacket. So all of it, looking back, was very autobiographical, but I was playing with what I could do in stone in the early years.
So now I know you mostly for the handbags. Was there anything in between? Or, when did you move into then the accessories side of things?
Well, before I moved into the accessory side of things, I went through a period of women's power And I went from carving and rebellion. I went from carving multiple pieces of stone together, which was very complicated and difficult, to carving out of a solid block of stone. I made a motorcycle jacket, sort of my rebellion statement of, and just carving beautiful forms and shape, which was so different than piecing materials together. So after the motorcycle jacket and my rebellion stage, I went into more of a feminine stage of beauty and power, carving beautiful white marble fabric teddies with overlaid lace in bronze. So I used all my skills, but I was expressing my female wilds within them. I had a little break in there because it was so hard doing this work that I kind of veered off into doing public art. I did a huge bridge for the MTA Arts for Transit in aluminum, and I made also a sculpture park on the Hudson River for the city of Yonkers. And then in the back of my mind for 10 years, I always wanted to make little girls' dresses. And the reason for this was the photographs that we took as young people before my father passed away of the family, of the children, dressed in with puffy sleeves and, 50s sort of nostalgic dresses. And I started to make those, and I still make those, and I make them, and they're also changing too. I mean, I make my own blocks of stone. I combine different materials together, onyxes, marbles, and then I carve them. So there's been many different stages. So basically, my work is comprised of three elements. Design, that's the marble that I use, and the way that I use it. Inlay, lamination, and all of that. Nostalgia, that's the history of my life. And the third element is popular culture, society. So the third part, the societal part, is the part of the Birkins. It originated because I wanted to do something other than the clothing, and I'm thinking accessories, and I thought, I had this handbag, the Chanel-like handbag as a child, so it was sort of, and I didn't do it right away, but thinking about it, it became more and more important to me that it held a lot of significance in the culture, in our culture today. What does a pocketbook represent? I mean, what does a Chanel, what does a Hermes Birkin represent in society today? Who are we? Does it identify us?
Yeah, I think that, there's such interesting pieces because I think they bring up a lot of, questions around that, around, well, obviously their iconic designs is one thing, but, the aspirational side of them as well. They're very aspirational items for a lot of people, these bags that cost tens of thousands of pounds and probably, cost more than your sculptures even.
Yes, many of them do, yes.
Some of your bags actually reference architecture as well, and you use loads of different types of stones. Can you tell us more about that?
Well, in my travels in Europe, and I do go pretty much at this point every year, I'm always looking at the different towns and the different colors of stones that they use in their architecture. And I seem to be attracted really to the Renaissance architecture, the Romanesque architecture the most. And depending on this town, depends on the colors that they use. For example, in Carrara, they use the whites and the grays. And in Tuscany, they use the darker grays. So I'm always looking for these materials that I could put them together. And I love to put architecture into my work. So the latest pieces that I'm doing, there are two pieces. And one is a Romanesque Birkin, where I'm actually stacking the stones of a particular region. And then I'm carving windows into the top part of it, making segmented arches like you see in the Romanesque church cathedrals in Europe. And so I'm making the comparison between this iconic imagery of the 21st century for women and status symbol with the idea of the importance of cathedrals in Europe and actually almost becoming a godlike item.
So as an object of worship type of thing, or a place of worship, yeah.
So it's almost like a place where we go to worship rather than just an item to carry our belongings in. Especially certain iconic bags.
So where do you go to source your materials? Obviously, you said you spend a lot of time in Italy. I guess, are you on buying trips, or do you use stones from other parts of the world as well?
Well, I do go to buy stone in Italy because much of the stone from the world goes there to be processed. So I can find stones from the region as well as finding other stones from all over the world. I particularly like onyx, and I like the onyxes that come from Iran. But as an American, I can't buy directly from Iran, so I have to go through Italy. I also find stones in the United States. There's a particular stone, a honey onyx, that I really love that comes from Utah. And then there's a blue onyx that comes from the Andes. So I learn always about new stones that I want to use, and I'm always looking for new stones that I could use.
What about sort of looking forward? Because I know some of your recent work is really building on the work that you've been doing recently with the architectural handbags, and using slightly more precious stones, I think you mentioned.
In my last piece that I'm working on now in the studio, it's a blue onyx Birkin, where in the belt part of the handbag, I am actually creating a piece of jewelry that replicates the jewels of the kings and queens, or also the papal jewels. So I'm beginning to study the shapes of the cabochons, the stones that they used, gold, how they did it, and placing them on the bag, as making, again, a comparison between contemporary times and another time in history.
So have you worked with precious stones before? Because they are always presented as very small items, whereas I can really consider your work to be quite large-scale pieces.
Well, that's a good question, because it comes back to the idea of what kind of technique and craft do you have? I mean, because I was a mold maker and a model maker, I'm able to understand how to make things like make clay, lace, make a mold, cast wax, pour bronze, and put it on my sculpture. In this case, with the jewels, because I have the experience in lost wax process, I understand how to make something in wax, cast it in gold, and then I can take a raw material gem and I could cut it myself and I could shape it myself. So because I have all of this experience, I'm able to put it into my work. So not only is it nostalgic, but it enhances what it is I'm trying to say.
So talking about your process, I mean, do you do everything by hand?
Well, originally, for the 41st years of my work, everything I did was cut by me, always sometimes with help of assistants. And now what I do is I have a roughing out process that I do. So before the work gets to me, I do use a CNC to rough it out, but then everything comes back to my studio in New York, and it takes me 2 to 4 months to finish everything or create the blocks, which I have to build first, and then do all the fine detail work and adding all the jewels and the polishing of the piece.
So how many pieces are you able to produce in a year then? That sounds like, quite a slow and labor-intensive work.
Well, originally it was 2 to 3, and now I would say it's about 6 to 7 a year. But it's also helped in me focusing on being able to do things that maybe I couldn't do before. So it sort of gives me a new way to look at things, which is kind of very exciting as an artist, that I can now not have to worry about removing a lot of material and taking months doing it, that I can focus more on putting the blocks together of all different colored stones, because those I have to do that myself. Or making jewelry for my pieces, or other aspects of the work that I can now add to the work that I couldn't do before. And it's also refreshing as an artist to be doing new things.
Of course.
The difference between now and then it's really the same thing. Today we have artists who have 100 people working for them, 50 people working for them. They don't touch their work. Back in the Renaissance, there were big studios, and artists produced work for hundreds of pieces for their cities, like Bernini, like Leonardo da Vinci, like all of these, or Ghirlandaio, like all of them, and they roughed out the work for them. So it's really the same tool that we had during the Renaissance that we have today, that we have at our hands today. Also, what's interesting to me is that I have a studio. I'm training students. I'm training people who work for me. So I really feel connected to that period, the Renaissance. It's not like I'm having other people do the work for me. I'm leading the studio, and it's coming out of my studio.
But the Renaissance, I mean, that's, as in, it just means, right, rebirth of, this sort of creative energy and all of that, which is kind of, I feel like that's what we're experiencing now with new technologies and everything emerging so quickly. It makes sense to be incorporating that into your process if it's, for it to be contemporary in that way, because your material is so associated with history in so many ways anyways.
Yeah, I find it all very interesting. I love using new technology. I love to incorporate it into my work. I love to be contemporary as I can, and yet bring in the history of what's been done. I mean, the stone itself is how old? A million years old, and that's part of it too.
Where did you say you teach? In New York or in Italy?
I teach stone carving. I've been teaching stone carving for over 20 years at the School of Visual Arts. Just 2 classes a semester. Now I'm just doing 1 class in the fall. Also, I just started teaching at the New York Academy. It's a master program in New York. It's the only master accredited program in New York State, I think, or maybe in New York City. And I love working with these students. They're from all over the world. It's a small class, but I love it because they want to learn this method and they want to learn how to carve. And it's a very difficult and time-consuming process, and most people cannot do it. And it's wonderful to be able to pass along what I know to a different generation.
Do you find students that come to you already come with some degree of experience?
Well, at this school, they have a lot of experience in figurative work. So they know probably at that point more about the figure than I know. They have experience in sculpture and modeling, but they really don't have experience in taking away, in the negative process. So, and also the copying process, they've never done that. So it's something very important that used to be taught in schools that is no longer taught in schools, because taking away is very different than adding on. And it makes you think a whole different way and gives you a whole other experience of thinking. And this evolves into a whole other world of work.
So a lot of what you're teaching, did you say that this is what you were learning when you were based in Italy? Did they have like different techniques and things, or did you find it was quite different what you learned in Italy to what it was in France?
Well, when I was in France, I was a student. I mean, I was just working. There was not much teaching going on. I think in Italy, I watched and I worked with artisans and I saw what they were doing. And they helped me. So I learned much more in Italy working in the mountains in Carrarra than I learned as a student in Paris.
And is that the sort of thing that you then now are teaching to your students in the US?
Well, I think what I'm teaching them is everything I learned over all the years. But basically, I have to teach them the basics. All of the knowledge that I've acquired over 45 years put into a 15-week course as far as we can get. Because obviously I can't teach them inlay and lamination and, I just teach them the basics of copying and using their eye and different methods.
So, like I said, the work is now kind of taking a different direction, being more embellished with the precious stones. Where do you see this work going, or, what's next for you?
I seem to work from idea to idea, so I'm still sort of stuck in these bags. But I am influenced when I see certain things. So what happens to me is I'll see something, and before I have an idea, I'll be inspired by something I see, and then I'll put that into an idea later on. So, for example, I was just in Verona, and I saw the red and white striped Romanesque cathedrals and buildings. And I just fell in love with it, and I'm thinking, okay, I want to make a Birkin using thin striped red and white material, marble, but this time I want to become even more abstract, whereas like in those buildings, the towers pop out, the segmented arches, the flying they're not flying buttresses, but just those segmented arches which are all over the building. Where else can I use them? What kind of towers and campanile can I put on these bags? So my brain goes there. What do they mean to me? I don't know that yet.
That's amazing. I really look forward to seeing how that unfolds then. So where can people find you online, Barbara?
Well, they can find me online at www.barbarasegal, Segal.com, or they can go to my Instagram, Barbara Segal, spelled the same way.
That's brilliant. Thanks so much for making time to talk to me today, Barbara. It's been great.
Thank you, Gita, so much. It was so lovely to talk to you.